.303 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Eric from Ohio.
Eric from Ohio. What's on your mind?
Not a whole lot. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about the Green New Deal and why I don't think it'll be as good for the environment, but better for jobs.
Why you don't think? Well, sure. Go ahead.
So I work in the auto industry, so things are a bit rough at the moment, but the incentives I've seen in the Green New Deal are mostly on the consumer side. And considering it takes about 5 to 7 years to make a car, any gains we get could be not seen until 2025, 2026. Mm. So I'm just a bit worried that any just consumer side incentives, tax rebates, that kind of stuff versus a mandate like they have out in China wouldn't necessarily be seen in time. So we'd have to actually mandate you need to make X amount of products at X price, or you're not going to get the use contracts type of thing.
Well, what about just like raising cafe standards at an accelerated pace?
That's a start, but all that would do is incentivize the luxury end of electrification and still have to maintain the combustion engines. It's not going to work towards electrification.
I would say that one of the problems with cafe standards, and maybe you need to modify the way that they're applied, is that it basically just does an average across a fleet, and that's what you're talking about. And in fact, my uncle at one point owned a car dealership, Chrysler car dealership, and so I know this story that Chrysler, when the cafe standards, and I don't know when this was, maybe 20 years ago, cafe standards were raised. Chrysler bought this electric car company that just made those electric vehicles that you see at the football game where they drive, where they somebody gets injured and they ride them off, and in these like little combination.
Yeah, they're like golf carts.
Flatbeds. And that GEM electric car company brought down the average of its cafe fleet. And of course, those things aren't even, maybe they're like they're roadworthy in like places like, I don't know, like downtown Charleston. I don't know. Like you see them like in places like that, like where they're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And,
well, the trouble is it's not that they don't have the technology or know how to do so. Both GM and Honda are currently making the equivalent of like the Tesla Model Y in China for about $10,000 less for sale right now. So kind of has about the incentives of California in terms of their electric cars. So it's possible for them to just bring that over to the U.S., but there's no government incentive to do so. And that's why you only see electric cars out on the West Coast, because they have their state mandates. A lot of car companies, I think 10 or 15, voluntarily accepted the CAFE standards without the zero emissions mandate, as opposed to Trump's cutbacks.
Right.
But there's no electrification. So that's where I'm worried that, sure, you're getting minor improvements every year, but there's no incentive for them to invest in that technology. Mm-hmm. They're just waiting for Tesla's technology or whoever's technology to become cheap enough for them to start using it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, I would be more concerned about that omission if I thought passing the Green Deal was imminent. But, I don't think there's no piece of legislation that we've seen that's been introduced that is going to end up being the legislation that gets passed, for better or for worse in some instances. And so, I think, I imagine that if we're in a position to pass anything that's even remotely resembling a Green New Deal, somebody would pick up on that. But that's a good point.
And I remember when AOC first got elected, or won the nomination, environmental groups, it was sort of behind, I don't think many said anything publicly, were frustrated that the Green New Deal was being championed, at least in the form that had been presented, because of course she didn't write it, because it didn't go far enough. And that was something that was brought up by a lot of those groups. I guess they lost that fight though. So,
all right.